Have you ever wondered how quickly the most secure places in our world can transform into scenes of chaos? On December 11th, 1978, John F. Kennedy International Airport, a gateway to America and one of the busiest air transit hubs on the planet, became the site of what would later be known as the most audacious heist in aviation history. What happened that night would not only challenge the very foundations of airport security across the nation, but would also leave an indelible mark on the psyche of a city already grappling with soaring crime rates. The luminous terminal building of JFK International gleamed against the ink-black December sky. Snow had been falling intermittently throughout the day, coating the runways with a thin layer of white that reflected the blue and amber lights of taxiing aircraft. Inside Terminal 4, the usual pre-holiday bustle filled the corridors as travelers hurried to their gates, unaware that they were about to become witnesses to a crime that would make headlines around the world. For Detective Marion Hayes of the Port Authority Police Department, it had been an unremarkable shift. At 43, Hayes had spent the better part of 2 decades working airport security, and the rhythms of JFK were as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. He knew every corridor, every service entrance, and every blind spot in the CCTV coverage. Hayes had been looking forward to ending his shift, going home to his wife Eleanor, and perhaps enjoying a glass of whiskey before bed. It was a simple routine that had sustained him through years of service, but as the digital clock on the wall of the security office clicked over to 10:47 p.m., everything changed. The first indication that something was wrong came through Hayes's radio, a crackling burst of static, followed by a breathless voice reporting gunshots near the Lufthansa cargo facility. Hayes reached for his service weapon, a .38 Special that had never been fired outside of the training range, and rushed toward the cargo area. As he ran, he keyed his radio to call for backup, but the response was delayed. Later, investigators would discover that the communication system had been deliberately jammed, the first sign that what was unfolding was no ordinary airport incident. The Lufthansa cargo facility was located in a separate building from the main passenger terminals, connected by a service road that wound around the perimeter of the airport. As Hayes approached, he could see the loading bay doors were open, unusual for this time of night. 2 cargo handlers lay face down on the concrete, their hands zip-tied behind their backs. They were alive but terrified, having been forced to the ground by armed men wearing ski masks and body armor. They knew exactly what they were looking for, one of the handlers would later tell investigators. They went straight for the high-value storage area. They had codes, keys, everything. It was like they'd rehearsed it 100 times. What Hayes didn't know, as he cautiously entered the facility, was that he was walking into a meticulously planned operation, orchestrated by a man known only as Bishop to his associates. Bishop was no ordinary criminal. A former military intelligence officer with a strategic mind and a network of contacts spanning several continents, he had been planning the JFK heist for more than a year. The target was a shipment of diamonds valued at $5. $8 million, along with $897,000 in cash, that had arrived on Lufthansa Flight 405 from Frankfurt earlier that evening. The shipment was destined for Midtown Manhattan's Diamond District, but Bishop had other plans. In the complex ecosystem of international crime, the diamonds represented more than just their monetary value. They were a key to access, influence, and power within certain circles that operated in the shadows of legitimate business. Inside the cargo facility, Hayes moved silently between steel shelving units stacked with parcels and shipping containers. The overhead lights had been dimmed, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. The air was cold. The loading bay doors had been open long enough to let the December chill creep in. Hayes could hear voices echoing from deeper within the facility, speaking in terse, clipped phrases. These weren't amateurs. They communicated with the precision of professionals. Check the manifest again. Container JL2239. It should be in the high security section. a voice commanded. "Already cleared. We've got the primary package and the secondary. Timer is running," another voice responded. Hayes pressed himself against a wall, trying to gauge how many perpetrators were involved. From what he could hear, there were at least 4, possibly more. They were armed. He had caught glimpses of automatic weapons, and they were efficient. This wasn't a smash-and-grab robbery, it was a surgical operation. What Hayes couldn't have known was that Bishop's team consisted of 7 individuals, each selected for specific skills. There was Elias Wright, a former Army Ranger who had served 3 tours in Vietnam and now worked as Bishop's second-in-command. Rebecca Chen, a computer expert who had helped hack into JFK's security systems. Marcus Diaz, whose background in theatrical special effects had allowed him to create convincing Port Authority uniforms and ID badges. The Kovalev brothers, Nikolai and Alexei, provided the muscle. Both had histories with Russian organized crime before coming to America. Daniel Morgan, a former air traffic controller who knew JFK's operational patterns intimately. And finally, there was Sarah Wells, whose job as a cargo administrator at the airport had given the team insider knowledge of shipping schedules and security protocols. Hayes edged closer to the voices, his heart pounding so loudly he feared it might give away his position. He had to assess the situation before backup arrived. The Port Authority police were responding, but Hayes knew they would establish a perimeter first, standard procedure for an active shooter situation. He was on his own for now. As Hayes peered around a corner, he finally got a clear view of the robbery in progress. 4 figures in dark clothing were transferring cases from a secure storage cabinet to duffel bags. Another stood guard at the main entrance to the storage area, while 2 more appeared to be working on something at a computer terminal. Likely the security system. "Time check," said the tallest figure, clearly the leader of the operation. 8 minutes elapsed. "4 remaining until security override fails," replied one of the figures at the computer. "Move faster. We follow the exit plan exactly as rehearsed." Hayes weighed his options. He was outnumbered and outgunned. Engaging directly would likely get him killed and might endanger the cargo handlers who were still restrained on the loading dock. His radio crackled. Backup was 5 minutes out. He needed to stay alive and gather intelligence until then. But fate had other plans. As Hayes began to retreat to a safer position, his foot struck an empty metal canister that had been left on the floor. The sound, a hollow, ringing clang, echoed through the cavernous space. "We've got company," the leader said calmly. "Nikolai, check it out." One of the armed figures detached from the group, raising an automatic weapon. Hayes pressed himself into the shadows, his hand tightening around his service weapon. He was a good shot. Annual qualifications consistently placed him in the department's top tier, but his revolver was no match for automatic firearms in a direct confrontation. The figure moved methodically, sweeping the beam of a tactical flashlight across the shelving units. Hayes held his breath as the light passed inches from his position. For a moment, he thought he might remain undetected. Then the radio at his hip chose that precise moment to crackle again. "Detective Hayes, be advised, SWAT is en route, ETA 4 minutes, please confirm your position." The armed figure swung around, the flashlight beam catching Hayes directly in the face, momentarily blinding him. "Here," the man shouted, "got a cop." What happened next would later be pieced together from forensic evidence, witness statements, and Hayes's own testimony. The detective fired first, his .38 catching the man, later identified as Nikolai Kovalev, in the shoulder. Kovalev returned fire, the burst from his weapon splintering the shelving unit beside Hayes. The detective dove for cover as bullets tore through packages and shipping containers. The gunfire alerted the rest of Bishop's team. The leader immediately activated their contingency plan. "Disengage, protocol echo, move now." 2 of the team members grabbed the duffel bags containing the diamonds and cash. Another detonated a small explosive device that had been placed near the facility's main electrical panel, plunging the building into darkness except for emergency lighting. The team had night vision equipment. The police would be coming in blind. In the chaos that followed, Hayes found himself pinned down by sporadic gunfire. He couldn't advance, couldn't retreat, and couldn't get a clear shot at any of the robbers. All he could do was maintain his position and wait for backup. Through gaps in the shelving, he caught glimpses of the team executing what was clearly a well-rehearsed evacuation plan. They moved with the coordination of a military unit, covering each other as they withdrew toward the loading bay. Outside, the first responders had established a perimeter, but they were confronting an unexpected development. 3 separate vehicles, a Port Authority maintenance truck, an airport catering van, and a fuel service vehicle, had simultaneously caught fire at different points around the airport, creating confusion and dividing the police response. Later investigation would reveal that these fires had been triggered remotely, part of Bishop's elaborate distraction strategy. As the SWAT team finally breached the cargo facility, Bishop's team was already making their escape. They had split into 3 groups, each taking different routes off the airport grounds. One group headed for a maintenance gate on the eastern perimeter, using falsified credentials to pass through. Another used the underground service tunnels that connected the cargo area to the long-term parking structures. The third, including Bishop himself, took the most audacious route. They walked directly through Terminal 3, dressed as Port Authority officers, calmly escorting what appeared to be a detained suspect, but was actually Daniel Morgan carrying a duffel bag containing the majority of the diamonds. Hayes, finally freed from his position by the arriving SWAT team, gave chase to one of the groups. His pursuit led him to the long-term parking structure where he confronted Alexei Kovalev and Marcus Diaz as they were transferring their share of the stolen goods to a waiting vehicle. "Police! Freeze!" Hayes shouted, his weapon trained on the 2 men. Diaz raised his hands immediately, but Kovalev reached for his weapon. Hayes fired twice, hitting Kovalev in the chest. The man collapsed against the side of the vehicle, his weapon clattering to the ground. Diaz, seeing his accomplice fall, made a desperate lunge for the driver's door. Hayes tackled him, and the 2 men struggled briefly before additional officers arrived to secure the suspect. In the aftermath, as emergency vehicles' lights painted the airport in alternating red and blue, Hayes sat on the bumper of an ambulance, a thermal blanket draped over his shoulders. He had suffered a graze wound to his arm during the shootout in the cargo facility, but his mind was on the bigger picture. They had captured 2 of the perpetrators, Diaz and the mortally wounded Kovalev, and recovered approximately 1/3 of the stolen goods. But the majority of the diamonds, all of the cash, and 5 members of the crew, including the mastermind, had vanished. The investigation that followed would become one of the most extensive in Port Authority police history. Every aspect of airport security was scrutinized. How had the team obtained security codes? How had they known about the shipment's contents and timing? How had they managed to jam police communications so effectively? The answers, when they eventually emerged, would reveal vulnerabilities in the system that no one had anticipated. Sarah Wells, the cargo administrator, was identified and arrested 3 days after the robbery when surveillance footage showed her accessing shipping manifests for Flight 405 outside her regular duties. Under interrogation, she revealed limited information about the operation, but insisted she had never met the leader face to face. All her instructions had come through Marcus Diaz, who had recruited her 6 months earlier. Diaz proved more forthcoming, especially when faced with multiple felony charges, including armed robbery, assault on a police officer, and felony murder for his role in the death of a cargo handler who had suffered a fatal heart attack during the robbery. In exchange for prosecutorial considerations, Diaz provided details about the planning of the heist, but claimed he only knew the leader as Bishop. He was obsessive about details, Diaz told investigators. We rehearsed every aspect of the operation using a mock-up of the cargo facility built in a warehouse in Newark. We ran drills with stopwatches. Everyone had specific tasks, backup plans, contingencies for the contingencies. I've worked some sophisticated jobs before, but nothing like this. This guy was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. The investigation expanded beyond the immediate events of December 11th. Financial records were scrutinized, leading to the discovery of a complex money laundering operation that had been established months in advance. Shell companies had been created, offshore accounts opened, and connections made with diamond merchants in Antwerp who asked few questions about provenance. Rebecca Chen was arrested in Montreal 2 weeks after the robbery, attempting to cross into Canada with a false passport. The Interpol alert for her arrest had been triggered by facial recognition software at the border crossing. Her laptop contained encrypted files that, when eventually decoded, provided investigators with their first real insight into Bishop's methodology. "He's not just a thief," the lead FBI investigator commented after reviewing Chen's files. "He's something else entirely. The planning, the attention to detail, the strategic thinking, it's more like a military operation than a robbery. And the way he's laundered the proceeds, it's like he's 2 steps ahead of us at every turn." As weeks turned into months, the investigation yielded diminishing returns. Elias Wright was found dead in a hotel room in Miami, an apparent suicide, though certain aspects of the scene raised questions among detectives. Daniel Morgan seemed to have vanished entirely. Facial recognition searches at ports and border crossings yielded nothing, and Bishop remained a ghost, a name without a face. For Detective Marion Hayes, the case became an obsession. The incident at JFK had changed him. The shootout, the death of Alexei Kovalov by his hand, the heart attack victim, these things weighed on him. But more than that, he was haunted by the methodical precision of the operation and the man who had orchestrated it. Hayes found himself lying awake at night, reviewing details of the case, searching for patterns or connections that might have been missed. His marriage suffered. Eleanor, initially supportive, grew increasingly concerned as Hayes withdrew into himself, spending evenings in their spare bedroom that had been converted into a makeshift investigation room, walls covered with photos, timelines, and maps. Their conversations became strained, limited to practical matters of daily life rather than the warm exchanges they had once enjoyed. "You're not hunting a criminal anymore, Marion," Eleanor finally said one evening. "You're hunting a ghost, and it's turning you into one too." But Hayes couldn't let go. Something about the case resonated with him on a fundamental level. It wasn't just professional pride or the sting of having been outmaneuvered. There was something personal about it, though he couldn't articulate exactly what. 6 months after the robbery, Hayes received an envelope at the precinct. Inside was a Polaroid photograph showing the Eiffel Tower and a playing card, the bishop from a chess set. No note, no fingerprints, no traceable evidence, just a taunt, a reminder that the architect of the heist was still free, still thinking about the detective who had disrupted his perfect plan. Hayes took a leave of absence from the department. He traveled to Paris, following the implied lead from the photograph, but found nothing. From there he went to Antwerp, center of the global diamond trade, where he spent weeks cultivating contacts and asking questions about recent unusual sales or trades. His PAPD badge carried little weight in Belgium, but his persistence eventually yielded information about a series of transactions that matched the profile of the stolen JFK diamonds. The trail led to Amsterdam, then to Zurich, and finally to a private bank in the Cayman Islands. Each step revealed another layer of Bishop's operation, another facet of his meticulous planning. The diamonds had been broken up, recut, and redistributed through legitimate channels. The cash had been laundered through a series of front companies before disappearing into the global financial system. It was, as one Swiss banking official described it, A masterclass in disappearance. Meanwhile, back in New York, the consequences of the JFK heist were still unfolding. Airport security protocols nationwide underwent a comprehensive review. New regulations were implemented for the handling of high-value cargo. Communication systems were upgraded to prevent the kind of jamming that had hampered the initial police response. The robbery had exposed vulnerabilities that no one had previously considered, and the aviation industry was determined not to be caught unprepared again. For the insurance companies involved, the JFK heist represented one of the largest single claims in aviation history. Investigations by private security firms paralleled the official police work, sometimes cooperating, sometimes competing for information. Rewards were offered, tip lines established, and international alerts maintained. But as the first anniversary of the robbery approached, the case had effectively gone cold. Hayes returned to New York after 3 months of international investigation, physically exhausted and mentally drained. His leave of absence had extended beyond its original parameters, straining his relationship with the department. Eleanor had moved out of their home, leaving a note that said simply, "When you're ready to live in the present again, call me." He returned to duty with the Port Authority Police, but requested a transfer away from JFK. He couldn't walk those corridors anymore without seeing ghostly images of that night. The muzzle flashes in the darkened cargo facility, the surprised expression on Kovalev's face as the bullet struck him, the clinical efficiency of Bishop's team as they executed their escape. Hayes was assigned to the Port Authority bus terminal, a chaotic, high-volume location that kept him busy enough to avoid dwelling on the past, at least during working hours. It was there, 13 months after the JFK heist, that Hayes encountered a well-dressed man observing the departure boards. There was nothing overtly suspicious about him. He carried a leather briefcase, wore an expensive but understated suit, and had the demeanor of a business traveler. But something about his posture, the way he scanned the terminal, alerted Hayes's instincts. The detective observed the man from a distance, noting how he checked his watch with precise movements, how his eyes systematically catalogued his surroundings. When the man left the terminal without taking any bus, Hayes followed. The pursuit led through Midtown Manhattan, the man moving at a deliberate pace, occasionally stopping to look at a storefront or check his phone. He never once looked back, never showed any indication that he was aware of being followed. Eventually, he entered an upscale hotel near Central Park, nodding to the doorman with the familiarity of a regular guest. Hayes hesitated outside. He had no warrant, no probable cause, nothing but an instinct that had been honed by decades of police work and the specific intensity of the JFK investigation. Following the man into the hotel would be a professional risk, potentially an illegal act. But the pull of his intuition was too strong to resist. The detective entered the lobby, scanning for his subject. The man had disappeared. Hayes approached the front desk, showed his badge, and asked if they had a guest matching the man's description. "I'm sorry, sir," the concierge replied with practiced discretion. "We don't provide information about our guests without a warrant." Hayes nodded, understanding the protocol. He wrote his contact information on a hotel notepad and slid it across the desk. "If a guest named Bishop is staying here, or if anyone matching that description checks in, I'd appreciate a call. It's a matter of public safety." The concierge's expression changed subtly, a flicker of recognition quickly suppressed. "I'll make a note of it, detective." Hayes left the hotel, convinced that he had stumbled onto something significant. He spent the night in his car, watching the entrance, but the well-dressed man never reappeared. In the morning, stiff and cold, Hayes returned to the front desk to speak with the next shift of staff. But the concierge he had spoken with the previous day had left an envelope for him. Inside was a room key and a note. "Room 1247. He said you'd come looking eventually." Heart racing, Hayes took the elevator to the 12th floor. He drew his service weapon before inserting the keycard. The door unlocked with a soft click, swinging open to reveal a spacious suite. The curtains were drawn, leaving the room in near darkness. Hayes entered cautiously, sweeping his weapon across the space as his eyes adjusted to the dim light. "You can put the gun away, Detective Hayes," said a voice from the sitting area. "If I wanted you dead, we wouldn't be having this conversation." A lamp switched on, revealing a man seated in an armchair. He was older than Hayes had expected, perhaps in his late 50s, with silver hair cut short and precise. His posture was relaxed but alert, his eyes sharp and evaluative. On the coffee table before him was a chess set, a game in progress. "Bishop," Hayes said, keeping his weapon trained on the man. "That's one of my names," the man acknowledged. "Please sit down. I've been looking forward to this meeting for some time." "You're under arrest for armed robbery, conspiracy and felony murder," Hayes said, his voice steady despite the surreal nature of the encounter. Bishop smiled slightly. "Am I? Look around you, Detective. Do you see any diamonds here? Any evidence connecting me to JFK? You have a ghost story and an obsession, nothing that would stand up in court. Diaz identified you. Wells, too. They identified a name and a methodology. Neither of them ever met me directly. I'm very careful about compartmentalizing my operations." Hayes kept his weapon raised, but his mind was racing. Bishop was right. There was no direct evidence linking him to the heist. Everything was circumstantial, built on the testimony of accomplices who had never seen the mastermind's face. "Why reveal yourself now?" Hayes asked. Bishop gestured to the chair opposite him. "Because the game is over, Detective. The diamonds have been dispersed, the money laundered. The statute of limitations will never expire for the murder charge. I understand that. But proving my connection to that unfortunate event would be challenging. I revealed myself because I wanted to meet the man who came closest to understanding my work." Against his better judgment, Hayes found himself lowering his weapon and taking the offered seat. Up close, he could see that Bishop had the weathered complexion of someone who had spent considerable time outdoors, despite his refined appearance. His hands bore calluses inconsistent with his current presentation, the marks of someone who had done physical labor in the past. "You've been following my investigation," Hayes said. It wasn't a question. "With interest," Bishop confirmed. "Your persistence is admirable. Amsterdam, Zurich, the Caymans. You followed the trail further than I anticipated. Most investigators would have given up after the first international dead end. I'm not most investigators. Clearly not. You have an instinct for this work that goes beyond training. You see patterns where others see only chaos. It's a rare quality." Hayes felt an unexpected sense of professional recognition, quickly followed by self-reproach. This man was a criminal, responsible for a violent robbery and, indirectly, for a death. The fact that he was also intelligent and observant didn't mitigate his crimes. "Why JFK?" Hayes asked, deciding to gather what information he could from this unexpected encounter. "Why diamonds?" Bishop leaned back in his chair, considering the question. JFK represented a unique convergence of opportunity and challenge. High-value cargo, complex security systems, multiple jurisdictions overlapping, Port Authority, NYPD, federal agencies. As for why diamonds, they're portable wealth, untraceable once recut, more stable than cash or art, the perfect target for someone with the right connections. "You had inside help beyond Wells," Hayes said, another piece of the puzzle falling into place. "Someone higher up in the security chain." Bishop's expression remained neutral. "What makes you say that?" "The security override, the knowledge of communication vulnerabilities. Wells wouldn't have had access to that level of information." A slight nod acknowledged the detective's insight. "Very good. Yes, there was another connection, though that individual is now beyond your reach, I'm afraid. Dead. Relocated. Permanently. With a new identity and enough compensation to ensure continued silence." Hayes absorbed this information, adding it to his mental map of the case. The heart attack victim, the cargo handler. That wasn't part of your plan. For the first time, a flicker of genuine regret crossed Bishop's features. No, that was unfortunate. My operations are designed specifically to avoid casualties. Violence attracts attention, creates complications. The handler had an undiagnosed cardiac condition. The stress of the situation triggered the attack. If it's any consolation, I've anonymously provided for his family. It's not, Hayes said flatly. Money doesn't replace a husband and father. No, Bishop agreed. It doesn't, but it prevents poverty from compounding grief. I may be a thief, detective, but I'm not heartless. They sat in silence for a moment, two men on opposite sides of the law, each measuring the other. Hayes was acutely aware that he should be calling for backup, placing Bishop under arrest, following protocol. But something held him back, the recognition that this moment, this conversation, might yield insights that no formal interrogation ever would. The playing card, Hayes said finally, the Polaroid of Paris. Why send them to me? Bishop smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his features, making him appear momentarily younger. I wanted to see what you would do, whether you would pursue the investigation beyond the boundaries of your jurisdiction, whether your tenacity matched your intelligence. And did it? You're here, aren't you? Hayes leaned forward, studying the chess game laid out between them. You've been playing against yourself? In a manner of speaking. The black pieces represent my strategy. The white pieces represent how I imagined you would respond if you were pursuing me directly, not just following a trail of breadcrumbs. Hayes examined the board. White was in a difficult position, not quite in check, but with limited favorable moves. You have my pieces nearly cornered. Nearly, Bishop agreed, but not quite. There's still a path to equalizing the position if the right moves are made. He gestured to the board. Your turn, detective. Hayes stared at the chess pieces, understanding that they were engaged in a conversation beyond words. After careful consideration, he moved a knight, creating a potential fork that threatened Bishop's queen and rook simultaneously. Bishop nodded appreciatively. Interesting choice. Aggressive but calculated. He countered with a move of his own, sacrificing a bishop to protect his queen. They played in silence for several minutes, the game evolving into a complex middle game where neither side held a clear advantage. Hayes found himself impressed by Bishop's strategic thinking, the way he set traps several moves in advance, the patience with which he developed his position. Why did you become a thief? Hayes asked eventually as he contemplated his next move. With your intelligence, your planning abilities, you could have succeeded in any number of legitimate fields. Bishop considered the question with the same care he gave to the chess game. I was a soldier once, special forces. I saw how the world really works, beyond the illusions of law and order that comfort ordinary citizens. I realized that the line between legitimate and illegitimate power is far more permeable than most people imagine. Governments, corporations, institutions, they all bend or break rules when it suits their purposes. I simply decided to operate by my own code rather than theirs. A convenient rationalization, Hayes observed. Perhaps, Bishop acknowledged without defensiveness. But tell me, detective, in your years of service, have you never questioned the system you uphold? Have you never seen justice compromised by politics or power? Have you never been ordered to look the other way when the perpetrator had the right connections? Hayes didn't answer immediately. His career had indeed included moments that had tested his faith in the system. Cases influenced by political considerations, investigations hampered by departmental politics, wealthy suspects receiving preferential treatment. But he had always believed that despite its imperfections, the law was worth upholding. The system isn't perfect, Hayes conceded, but it's better than the alternative. Without law, without accountability, Power becomes its own justification. The strong prey on the weak. Society disintegrates. A philosophical perspective I might have expected, Bishop said, nodding. You're a man of principles, Detective Hayes. I respect that, even if we interpret those principles differently. He moved his queen, putting Hayes's king in check. Your principles cost you, though, didn't they? Your marriage, your peace of mind. Hayes felt a flash of anger at the personal observation, but controlled it. Don't presume to know me based on a file you've compiled. Not just a file, Bishop corrected him. Observation. The way you pursued this case long after your superiors would have preferred you to let it go. The toll it took on your personal life, your apartment, sparse, functional, the home of someone who lives for their work rather than in their life. The leave of absence that became a personal crusade across Europe. These are the actions of a man driven by something beyond professional duty. Hayes moved his king out of check, buying time while he considered his overall strategy. And what drives you, Bishop? It's not just money. Someone with your skills doesn't need to risk a major heist for financial gain. Perceptive, Bishop said with approval. No, it's not about money, though financial compensation is certainly a factor. It's about the challenge. The chess game against systems designed to be impenetrable. Each operation is a puzzle. Finding the vulnerabilities, assembling the right team, anticipating every contingency, executing with precision. There's a purity to it that I've never found in conventional endeavors. And the risk? The possibility of spending your life in prison. Bishop's eyes gleamed with something like amusement. Risk is essential to meaningful achievement, Detective. Without risk, accomplishment becomes hollow. I imagine you understand that better than most. Every time you put on your badge and gun, you accept certain risks in service to your calling. My calling simply exists outside the framework you recognize as legitimate. The chess game continued, moves and counter-moves, each man testing the other's strategic thinking. Neither gained a decisive advantage. As they played, they continued their unusual conversation, half interrogation, half philosophical discourse. The JFK heist was your last operation, wasn't it? Hayes asked suddenly, seeing a pattern in Bishop's manner, in the way he spoke of his criminal career. Bishop raised an eyebrow, impressed. What makes you say that? This meeting. The chess game. The fact that you're here in New York, practically inviting capture. You've been watching me investigate a case that's effectively closed. These aren't the actions of someone planning their next job. They're the actions of someone saying goodbye to a chapter of their life. A slow smile spread across Bishop's face. Remarkable. Yes, Detective Hayes, the JFK operation was my final undertaking in that particular line of work. I've reached an age where risk calculations change. The thrill of the game no longer outweighs the potential consequences of failure. I've accumulated sufficient resources to live comfortably for whatever time remains to me. And perhaps most importantly, I recognize that luck eventually runs out for everyone, no matter how careful their planning. So this meeting is what? A victory lap? A chance to gloat over the one detective who got close but not close enough? Bishop shook his head. Not at all. This meeting is an acknowledgement, a recognition of a worthy adversary. In another life, Detective Hayes, we might have been colleagues rather than opponents. We share certain qualities, attention to detail, strategic thinking, persistence. We differ primarily in our relationship to authority and conventional morality. Hayes studied the man across from him, trying to reconcile the sophisticated, articulate individual before him with the architect of a violent armed robbery. You still haven't explained why you revealed yourself. There's no statute of limitations on felony murder. I could arrest you right now. You could try, Bishop said mildly. But on what evidence? I've admitted nothing that would stand up in court. I've connected myself to no specific crime. We're just two men playing chess and engaging in a hypothetical conversation. Then why risk even this much exposure? Bishop was silent for a long moment, contemplating the chessboard. Finally, he looked up, and Hayes was surprised to see something like vulnerability in the man's expression. Legacy, perhaps. Not in the conventional sense. I have no children, no one to carry my name forward. But the thought of disappearing completely, with no one understanding the extent of what I accomplished, it troubled me. You, Detective Hayes, are the only person who came close to comprehending the full scope of the JFK operation. You're the only one who can appreciate the elegance of its design, even as you condemn its execution. In a strange way, you're the only witness to my life's work who matters. Hayes found himself oddly moved by the confession. For all his criminal sophistication, Bishop was still human, subject to the universal desire to be understood, to have his existence acknowledged. "There's something else," Hayes said, another realization dawning. "You're dying." Bishop's expression registered surprise, quickly masked. "What makes you say that?" "The finality in how you speak, the need for closure, the timeline of your retirement from criminal activities and—" Hayes hesitated, then decided to voice his observation. "The medication in your jacket pocket. The outline is visible. A specific shape of pill bottle I recognize from my father's illness. Cancer, isn't it?" A flash of genuine respect crossed Bishop's features. "Pancreatic, stage 4, 6 months, perhaps less. Another reason why conventional justice has little meaning for me now. Prison or freedom. Either way, my sentence has been pronounced." Hayes absorbed this information with complex emotions. The detective in him still wanted justice, still believed that Bishop should answer for his crimes in a court of law, but the human being in him recognized the futility of pursuing legal punishment for a man already facing the ultimate judgment. "I'm sorry," Hayes said simply. "Don't be," Bishop replied. "I've lived a full life on my own terms. Few can claim as much." He moved a chess piece, his queen, positioning it for a decisive attack. Check. Hayes studied the board, seeing that his position had deteriorated while his attention was divided. He had only a few legal moves, none of them promising. With careful consideration, he moved his king to the only safe square available. Bishop immediately moved his rook, cutting off the king's escape route. Check again. Hayes examined the board with growing concern. His options were dwindling. After careful consideration, he interposed a bishop, blocking the check, but leaving his defensive structure weakened. "You play chess the same way you conduct investigations," Bishop observed. "Methodical, principled, willing to sacrifice for long-term advantage. And you play like you plan heists," Hayes countered, "creating diversions, setting traps, always thinking several moves ahead." Bishop smiled at the observation. "Life imitates art, or perhaps it's the other way around." He moved his knight, threatening Hayes's queen. "What will you do when this case is truly over, detective? When I'm gone and the JFK heist becomes just another file in the archives?" Hayes hadn't allowed himself to think that far ahead. For more than a year, the case had consumed him, defined his professional identity, even shaped his personal life. The prospect of its definitive conclusion left an unsettling void. "I'll do my job," he said finally. "There are always more cases, more criminals. But not like this one," Bishop suggested. "Not like me." Hayes didn't respond immediately, instead moving his queen to safety. It was true. In his decades of police work, he had never encountered a criminal mind like Bishop's, never been drawn into such an intricate contest of intellects. The thought that it would soon end brought an unexpected sense of loss. "I've left something for you," Bishop said, breaking the silence. "A gift of sorts." Hayes looked up sharply. "What kind of gift?" "Information. In a safe deposit box at Manhattan Trust. The key and access details are in an envelope under this chessboard." Bishop moved his queen diagonally across the board. "Checkmate in 3 moves, I believe." Hayes studied the position and saw that Bishop was right. His king was trapped, the coming checkmate inevitable. With a small nod of acknowledgement, he tipped over his king, conceding the game. "What's in the safe deposit box?" he asked. "Closure," Bishop replied, "for both of us. I only ask that you wait 1 month before accessing it. By then, I'll be beyond the reach of earthly justice." Hayes considered his options. His duty as a police officer was clear. He should arrest Bishop immediately, whatever the evidentiary challenges might be. But something deeper, more intuitive, told him that there was more to be gained by following this unusual path to its conclusion. "I want your word on one thing," Hayes said. "The remaining members of your crew, are any of them still operational, still committing crimes?" Bishop shook his head. "They've all been generously compensated for their silence and retirement. The JFK operation yielded sufficient returns to ensure none of them need work again, legitimate or otherwise. Daniel Morgan is teaching sailing in New Zealand under a new identity. Rebecca Chen has ironically taken a position with a cybersecurity firm in Singapore, and Sarah Wells completed her sentence last month. Minimum security, good behavior. She's moving to Arizona to be near her sister. And Elias Wright. Was his suicide staged?" A shadow crossed Bishop's face. "No, that was unfortunate. Elias had demons that predated our association. Vietnam left scars that never fully healed. The pressure of the operation, followed by the intensity of the manhunt, proved too much for him." Hayes nodded, another piece of the puzzle falling into place. "You didn't just select your team for their skills. You chose people who needed the money, who had reasons to risk everything." "I selected people who deserved a second chance," Bishop corrected him. "People with extraordinary abilities who had been discarded by conventional society. The money was important, yes, but so was the opportunity to apply their talents at the highest level." "You make it sound almost noble," Hayes said with a hint of irony. "There's nothing noble about theft," Bishop acknowledged, "but there can be a certain integrity in how it's conducted, in the treatment of one's associates, in minimizing harm to innocents. I've lived by a code, Detective Hayes. Not your code, perhaps, but a code nonetheless." The conversation had reached its natural conclusion. Both men sensed it. The chess game was over, their unusual encounter drawing to a close. Bishop stood, straightening his jacket with a habitual gesture. "I'll be leaving New York tomorrow," he said. "You won't see me again." Hayes rose as well, feeling the weight of the moment. "I could stop you." "You could try," Bishop agreed, without heat or threat in his voice. "But I think we both know you won't. Not today. The game between us has been more complex than either of us anticipated when it began that night at JFK. It deserves a more nuanced ending than handcuffs and a holding cell." Against every regulation, against the oath he had sworn as an officer of the law, Hayes found himself nodding. "1 month," he said. "Then I open the safe deposit box." 1 month, Bishop confirmed. He extended his hand, a final gesture between adversaries who had developed an unexpected mutual respect. After a moment's hesitation, Hayes shook the offered hand. "Goodbye, Bishop." "Goodbye, Detective Hayes." Hayes left the hotel room without looking back. In the elevator, descending to the lobby, he experienced a storm of conflicting emotions. Professional frustration at letting a confessed criminal walk free, mingled with a complex respect for the man's intellect and a strange sense of shared experience. They had been locked in an intricate dance for over a year, hunter and hunted, each learning the other's patterns and processes. Such intense connection, even across the divide of law and criminality, created bonds not easily broken or defined. In the weeks that followed, Hayes found himself gradually reconnecting with the other aspects of his life. He called Eleanor, and they met for dinner, a tentative first step toward possible reconciliation. He applied for a transfer back to JFK, feeling that he could now walk those corridors without being haunted by the events of December 11th. He even began sleeping through the night again, the obsessive review of case details no longer keeping him awake until dawn. True to his word, Hayes waited exactly 1 month before visiting Manhattan Trust. The bank manager escorted him to the private room where safe deposit boxes could be accessed, leaving him alone with the metal container that Bishop had specified. The key turned smoothly in the lock, the drawer sliding open to reveal a single manila envelope. Inside were documents, detailed confessions to every aspect of the JFK heist, including names, dates, methods, and the location of Bishop's share of the proceeds. There were wire transfer details showing anonymous donations to the family of the heart attack victim. There was a list of security vulnerabilities at JFK that had been exploited during the robbery, with recommendations for addressing them. And finally, there was a handwritten letter addressed directly to Hayes. "Detective Hayes," it began, "by the time you read this, I will have departed this life." The cancer progressed more rapidly than expected, and rather than endure a protracted decline, I chose to end things on my own terms. I am not a man of regrets, but I acknowledge that my choices have caused harm to others, including you. The obsession that drove your investigation took a toll on your personal life, your mental well-being, and your career trajectory. For that, I offer what amends I can. The enclosed documents provide everything necessary to close the JFK case definitively. Names have been changed where needed to protect those who have truly reformed their lives. My own identity remains obscured, a final indulgence you will perhaps forgive. The financial information will allow for recovery of the majority of the proceeds, which should satisfy the insurance companies and your superiors. Our game is concluded, Detective. You played with honor and intelligence, coming closer to victory than any opponent I have faced. In another life, we might have been allies rather than adversaries. Perhaps that thought can provide some small consolation as you move forward from this case that has defined us both. Live well, Detective Hayes. Find your way back to Eleanor. She is your anchor to a normal life that I never had the wisdom to pursue. Return to JFK not as a man haunted by failure, but as a guardian made wiser by experience. And perhaps, on occasion, when you look up at the night sky above those runways, think of the strange connection forged between a detective and a thief on a snowy December night that changed both our lives forever. The letter was signed simply B. Hayes read it twice, then carefully returned it to the envelope along with the other documents. The case that had consumed his life for more than a year was effectively solved. The evidence would never lead to a prosecution of Bishop himself. The man was beyond earthly justice now. But it would allow for recovery of assets, implementation of improved security measures, and official closure of the investigation. As Hayes left the bank, stepping into the bright spring sunshine, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The obsession that had driven him across continents, that had cost him his marriage and nearly his sanity, was finally laid to rest. Bishop was gone, but he had left behind a resolution that few detectives ever received for their most challenging cases. That evening, Hayes called Eleanor again. Their conversation was longer this time, more personal. He told her about the conclusion of the case, about the strange meeting with Bishop, about the contents of the safe deposit box. She listened without judgment, understanding better than anyone the toll the investigation had taken on him. "Do you think you can let it go now?" she asked finally. "Really let it go?" "Yes," Hayes said, and was surprised to discover that he meant it. "It's over. Bishop is gone. The case is closed. I'm ready to move forward." "Forward where?" Eleanor asked, a cautious hope in her voice. "Wherever we decide to go," Hayes replied, "together if you're willing." The reconciliation wasn't immediate or simple. Trust, once broken, requires time and consistent effort to rebuild. But over the months that followed, Hayes and Eleanor gradually found their way back to each other. He returned to JFK as he had planned, but with a new perspective, not as a detective haunted by the one case he couldn't solve, but as an experienced officer whose encounter with an exceptional criminal had made him better at his job. The security recommendations that Bishop had included in the safe deposit box were implemented, not just at JFK, but at airports nationwide. Without knowing their source, aviation security experts hailed them as innovative approaches to vulnerabilities that had previously gone unrecognized. Hayes took quiet satisfaction in knowing that Bishop's final legacy included not just the resolution of the case, but improvements that would prevent similar heists in the future. 1 year to the day after their meeting in the hotel room, Hayes found himself standing on the observation deck at JFK, watching aircraft take off and land against the backdrop of a winter sunset. The events of December 11th, 1978 had receded into departmental history, still discussed occasionally in training sessions, still referenced as a case study in aviation security literature, but no longer a living obsession in Hayes's mind. As darkness fell and the runway lights came on, Hayes thought about Bishop's letter, about the strange connection that had formed between them. They had been opponents in an elaborate game, detective and criminal locked in an intellectual duel spanning continents. But they had also been, in some indefinable way, kindred spirits, men who recognized in each other a shared capacity for strategic thinking, attention to detail, and unwavering persistence. Hayes knew that he would never fully resolve the ethical complexity of his decision to let Bishop walk free that day in the hotel. It had been a violation of his professional duty, a compromise of the principles he had upheld throughout his career. And yet, it had led to a resolution that formal justice might never have achieved: the recovery of stolen assets, improvements in security protocols, closure for the families affected by the heist, and Hayes' own personal reconciliation with the case that had nearly destroyed him. As he turned to leave the observation deck, Hayes noticed a chess piece in his coat pocket, a white king, intricately carved from ivory. He had no memory of putting it there, no idea how it had come into his possession. For a moment, he stood perfectly still, scanning the sparse crowd on the deck, half expecting to see a familiar figure watching him from the shadows. But there was no one, just travelers and aviation enthusiasts enjoying the nocturnal ballet of arrivals and departures. Hayes smiled to himself, pocketing the chess piece once more. Bishop was gone, their game concluded. But the final move, it seemed, had been the master thief's after all, a reminder that even in death he remained one step ahead, a ghost in the complex machinery of airport security, a legend in the annals of aviation crime, and an indelible presence in the life and career of Detective Marion Hayes. That night, as Hayes drove home to the house he once again shared with Eleanor, he felt a sense of completion that had eluded him since the night of the heist. The JFK case had changed him, challenged him, nearly broken him. But it had also revealed strengths he hadn't known he possessed, forced him to confront complexities beyond the black and white morality of his training, and ultimately led him back to what mattered most: his marriage, his peace of mind, his fundamental belief in justice, tempered now with a more nuanced understanding of human nature. The robbery at JFK International would remain the most significant case of Hayes's career. In the years that followed, he would rise through the ranks of the Port Authority Police, eventually becoming Chief of Airport Security, implementing innovations that made JFK a model for aviation safety worldwide. He would never again encounter a criminal mind like Bishop's, never again be drawn into such an intricate contest of wits and wills. But the lessons of that case, and the strange respect that had developed between adversaries, would inform every aspect of his professional life. And occasionally, on quiet evenings, when the demands of his position allowed, Hayes would take out the chessboard, set up the pieces, and replay the game from the hotel room, the moves and counter-moves, the strategic gambits, the inevitable checkmate. In those moments, Bishop lived again in Hayes's memory, not as a criminal to be apprehended, but as a worthy opponent who had, in his own way, made the detective a better guardian of the public trust. For in the complex ecosystem of law and criminality, predator and prey sometimes develop connections that transcend simple categories. The hunter comes to know the hunted intimately, to anticipate patterns and preferences, to recognize motivations and methods. And in that knowing, something unexpected can emerge, not friendship certainly, but a form of respect, a recognition of shared humanity across the divide of legal and illegal, right and wrong, detective and thief. As the years passed and Hayes approached retirement, he was occasionally asked by younger officers about the legendary JFK heist of 1978. He would tell the official version, the facts of the case, the recovery of assets, the implementation of improved security measures. But he never spoke of the hotel room, the chess game, the safe deposit box, or the letter signed simply B. Those memories remained private, a personal epilogue to a case that had redefined airport security and reshaped the course of Hayes's life. On the last day of his career, as Hayes cleared out his office at JFK, he found the white chess king in the back of his desk drawer. He held it for a long moment, remembering the man who had placed it in his pocket all those years ago, the master thief who had become, improbably, the catalyst for Hayes's greatest professional achievements and personal growth. Hayes placed the chess piece in his pocket once more and walked through the terminal one final time, nodding to colleagues, shaking hands with staff members, taking in the controlled chaos of the airport he had helped to secure for nearly 4 decades. Outside, Eleanor was waiting to drive him home to begin the next chapter of their lives together. As Hayes approached her, he felt a sense of completion, of a circle properly closed. The deadly night at JFK had shocked New York security forces, exposed vulnerabilities in aviation safety, and launched the most extensive investigation in Port Authority police history. But it had also set in motion a sequence of events that led to stronger protections, deeper insights, and a detective's journey from obsession to wisdom. In the complex calculus of crime and consequence, perhaps that unexpected legacy was Bishop's most impressive accomplishment of all. As Hayes drove away from JFK for the last time as its chief of security, he glanced in the rearview mirror at the terminal buildings receding behind him. For a fleeting moment he thought he glimpsed a silver-haired man in an expensive suit, watching his departure. But when he looked again, there was no one there. Just the gleaming architecture of an airport, transformed by the lessons of a robbery that had occurred almost 40 years earlier. Hayes smiled and turned his attention to the road ahead, to Eleanor beside him, to the future they would share. The game was over. The king had fallen. But the board remained, ready for new players, new strategies, new contests between those who protected and those who plundered. The deadly night at JFK was now history, but its echoes would continue to shape aviation security for generations to come, a legacy neither Hayes nor Bishop could have fully anticipated when their paths first crossed in a darkened cargo facility on a snowy December night in 1978. Hey there, my amazing viewers. If you enjoyed this thrilling dive into one of the most notorious airport heists in American history, don't forget to hit that subscribe button right now. Each week, I bring you fascinating true crime stories, unsolved mysteries, and in-depth analyses of cases that shaped security protocols around the world. Subscribe to join our growing community of crime enthusiasts, security professionals, and mystery lovers who never miss an episode. Click that bell icon to get notified whenever I post new content, and leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on the JFK heist. Do you think Bishop was ever really caught? Was Detective Hayes right to let him go? Let's discuss in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.